Howdy there, everybody. Hopefully my fan and AC, they're running. I really hope they're not too loud. I'm not going to shut them off, and I'm not going to wait until I don't have to run them to make this video. And I don't know if there's a way to correct for those ambient noises in OBS, and if there is, I don't know what it is. So hopefully those aren't too dominating in this particular video, so we can go over it and cover it. I was reading an article from Nautilus Magazine, and this one was a really interesting one. So let's make sure I get my camera completely out of the text. Let's take a look. The electrons may very well be conscious. That's right. Okay, sure. Let's dive right in here. This month, the cover of New Scientist, which is quite a reputable website, ran the headline, "Is the Universe Conscious?" And I should mention, I did not actually read this article that they're mentioning here. I probably should have, but what can you do? So I don't actually know the nature of this article. I don't know if it's as bad as this one is. This one isn't like really bad, but there are definitely some things in it that need to be corrected. So anyway, this month, the cover of New Scientist ran the headline, "Is the Universe Conscious?" Mathematician and physicist Johannes Kleiner. I looked him up. I'm not going to deny that he's a physicist because he's worked at like the Center for Theoretical Physics at Harvard. What was it? The University of like Zurich or Munich or something like that. He worked in the theoretical physics department. But from what I could find, he only has a PhD in mathematics. I haven't found a degree in specifically physics. But I mean, I'm not going to say that he's not a physicist if he's worked at, you know, the theoretical physics departments in some of the most reputed institutions on the planet. But I did want to specify that I was not able to find a relevant degree in physics from this guy, but me not finding it doesn't mean he doesn't have it. At the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy in Germany, told author Michael Brooks that a mathematically precise definition of consciousness could mean that the cosmos is suffused with subjective experience. See, this is the thing with articles that say stuff like this. I don't know what this is supposed to mean. And I know that sounds like really analytically philosophical, but I don't know how to interpret statements like this. I read this, and there's several different ways I could interpret what that's supposed to mean, and I don't know how this author is trying. I don't know what meaning he's trying to portray. And like I said, that's what really bothers me with some of these articles, is that it seems like they're being fairly explanatory, but when you really break down what it is they're saying, it's hard to get a lot of meaning out of it. I cannot. The cosmos is suffused with subjective experience. I have no clue what to take away from that. Anyway, this could be the beginning of a scientific revolution, Kleiner said, referring to research he and others have been conducting. Kleiner and his colleagues are focused on the integrated information theory of consciousness, one of the more prominent theories of consciousness today. I do believe the global workspace theory is still adhered to it more so. The global workspace theory, I think, has a larger, I don't want to say following, but there's more professionals that favor the global workspace theory over the integrated information theory. I do have a published, peer-reviewed, I believe, not study, I guess you could call it a type of poll that was done with experts in neuroscience. I'm not going to pull it up now. I'll link it down in the description when this video posts if you guys want to check that out. But yeah, in GWT, Global Workspace Theory, is more prominent than IIT, the Integrated Information Theory, which I still think is a respectable, this is certainly a respectable model of consciousness, I think. One of the more prominent theories of consciousness today, as Kleiner notes, IIT is thoroughly panpsychist because all integrated information has at least one bit of consciousness. Well, so first off, no, it's not thoroughly panpsychist. I know IITs that reject panpsychism, and actually, when I first went through this article, I was able to go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a peer-reviewed philosophical journal. For those that want to know, like, this isn't just some rando website. This is a peer-reviewed academic press. And if I could find, here we go, Relation to Panpsychism. The IIT literature, not only from Tononi, but also from Koch, I'm assuming that's Koch, maybe Cook, and others, refers with some regularity to panpsychism. Broadly put, any metaphysical system that attributes mental properties to basic elements of the world, like electrons, as sharing important ground with IIT. Panpsychism comes in different forms, and the precise relation between it and IIT has yet to be established. I think that's a very important point right there. Both IIT and panpsychism strongly endorse Cartesian commitments concerning the immediate nature of experience. IIT, however, only attributes mental properties to re-entrant architectures because it claims that only these will integrate information. This is inconsistent with any version of panpsychism that insists upon attributing mental properties to even more basic elements of the structure of existence. So, this statement that IIT is thoroughly panpsychist is demonstrably false. Now, for those that don't really know about the IIT, I don't know a lot about it, and it's kind of hard to define because there's like a bunch of axioms that are associated with it. But there's another really, really good article that covers the integrated information theory and covers its potential relation to panpsychism from Royal Society Publishing. I will also post that down in the description of this video for anybody that wants to check that out, because I do not have enough confidence in my ability to explain what IIT is, nor do I really have the time. That's not the purpose of this video. But as we see here from a peer-reviewed philosophical journal, and I think most people can agree, panpsychism, philosophy of mind, definitely handled by the realm of philosophy, not exclusively, but it is certainly handled by the realm of philosophy, straight up says, no, IIT can be inconsistent with most forms of panpsychism. Personally, I would say that I do think panpsychism can be meshed with IIT, but I do think there could be problems with that. It just depends on what particular interpretation of each one you choose to adopt. That's going to determine how well they can couple together. And I also, from what I've been told anyway, I would need to talk to some philosophers of mind on this, but I have been told that panpsychism, not that this is necessarily related to the article, but just as a tidbit of information, that panpsychism can be construed in terms of physicalism. There could be a physicalist panpsychism, so to speak. Also, the all-integrated information has at least one bit of consciousness. With the little bit of reading that I did read probably, I'd say, maybe half, 40%, 50% of that Royal Society article. I did read a little bit of this too, this from the IEP. Bit of consciousness, I must say, wasn't a term that I came across. Now, maybe they worded it differently and I just missed it. But yeah, this bit of really this entire idea that all integrated information has at least one bit of consciousness is not something that I saw, but I'm not going to say that that actually is false because I don't feel versed enough in IIT, considering I don't personally adhere to it, to state that this is false. Just that when I was looking into it, I didn't see anything that seemed to support that statement. So this whole paragraph, it really causes me to raise an eyebrow. I would be curious as to the author's background in neuroscience, as well as philosophy, and maybe even a bit of physics, since we are talking about electrons. You might see the rise of panpsychism as part of the Copernican trend, the idea that we're not special, the Earth is not the center of the universe, humans are not a treasured creation, or even the pinnacle of evolution. So why should we think that creatures with brains like us are the sole bearers of consciousness? Well, as I understand it, I don't think like any neuroscientists or evolutionary biologists believe that. I could be wrong, but I don't think many people in general believe that. I think most people would say that dogs are conscious, that cats are conscious. I'm sure many of you in the audience watching this video have probably heard of slime mold, which can solve mazes. It can find its way through a maze. And even Aaron Ra has said he still thinks that there's some form of very, very rudimentary consciousness present in that. I'm willing to grant the idea, even if for the sake of discussion, that there is a rudimentary form, regardless of how rudimentary, that there is some rudimentary form of consciousness or at least some form of awareness of your surroundings, whether it's really, because I don't see those as being the same things. Maybe some people do, but to me, consciousness isn't just aware of your surroundings. That's included in consciousness, but consciousness takes it, I think, a few, if not several steps beyond that even. That yes, consciousness includes an awareness of your surroundings, but also an awareness of oneself and numerous other aspects to it. So I'm willing to grant, again, even if only for the sake of a discussion, that all forms of at least life possess some very elementary form or rudimentary form of awareness, but I don't think I would extend that to non-living things. I just, that would be really hard for me to do. I think that would just be an interesting discussion to have with somebody. I do know that the idea is not at all popular amongst physicists. I know panpsychism has been on the rise, but I still don't think it's that popular amongst philosophers, but don't quote me on that one. So why should we think creatures with brains like us are soul bearers of consciousness? We're almost certainly not. In fact, we know we're not. We can look at other great apes. We can look at dolphins, dogs. In fact, panpsychism has been around for thousands of years as one of various solutions to the mind-body problem. That is true. Electrons may have some extremely rudimentary mind. Excuse me. While there are many versions of panpsychism, the version I find appealing is known as constitutive. Constitutive? I suppose it's probably either way. Well, I mean, what words are polysemous? You can make them up if you really want to. Constitutive panpsychism. It states, to put it simply, that all matter has some associated mind or consciousness, and vice versa. So it's stating that all, right here where he says, where there is mind, there is matter, and where there is matter, there is mind. This, I'm not going to say that like he's wrong here. This is just this author's. I'm not going to say that constitutive panpsychism is his. Like he invented it, but that's what he prefers. I would just say that I reject this. This as a premise, I reject this. The idea of matter having a mind. Well, I mean, elementary forms of matter like electrons having minds does not seem to be supported by any data either in physics or neuroscience. They go together as modern panpsychists like Alfred North Whitehead, David Ray Griffin, Galen Strawson, and others have argued all matter has some capacity for feeling, albeit highly rudimentary feeling in most configurations of matter. Again, it goes back to, it's hard for me. I would need to know what is being meant by this. Like, what particular idea is being meant by saying these things? There's just a lot of probing I would really like to do, which I knew was going to be a problem when I first read this article and making this video. There's going to be a lot that I don't even know what's trying to be argued. But yeah, the idea that all forms of matter possess some, albeit rudimentary, but still some form of consciousness and vice versa, I just reject that premise. I don't really think that there could be a good argument given for that. Panpsychists look at the many rungs on the complexity ladder of nature and see no obvious line between mind and no mind. This I agree with. I at least this part here. Look at the many rungs on the complexity ladder of nature and see no obvious line between mind and no mind. It's the same thing. That is there really a defined line between what is life and what isn't life, especially in regards to abiogenesis and origins of life. It wasn't as if 1 second there was no life and then poof, there it is, it's now a life. It's that there was a gradient process where non-living things slowly developed into what we define as living things or living systems. It would probably be extremely difficult for anybody to draw a line and say everything on this side is not alive and everything on this side is alive. That would be really hard. I mean, even now there's a new debate coming up. I shouldn't say new. It's sort of a resurfacing debate about whether or not about whether or not viruses are actually living. Dan Stern Cardinal, who has the channel Creation Myths, you should go subscribe. Actually, I'll link that down there too, since I'm mentioning him so that people can find his channel, has even said that, yeah, there's a debate on this and that some viruses could be considered alive. And I think I agree with that. And I think it's the same with mind and no mind, or consciousness. There isn't a defined line that once you're past that line, oh, it's conscious now, but below it, it's not. It's very much a gradient. Are jellyfish conscious? Some might say yes, some might say no. Some people don't think dogs have a consciousness. I think they do. Some people would say there's probably some humans out there that don't have a consciousness. So yeah, I agree with that. But I don't think that point that there is no defined, distinctive line between what mind and no mind in any way, shape, or form, or rather that does not in and of itself, I think, support panpsychism at all. I don't think that falls stringently under a panpsychist view. Philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked in 1974, what is it like to be a bat? Oh, the whole what's it like to be a bat. We can learn everything about bats and how they work and how their minds work and everything, but would we ever know what it's like to be a bat? And I would say, well, no, because you're not a bat. How could you know what it's like to be something that you can't be? It makes no sense to even ask the question to me. We can't know with any certainty, but we can reasonably infer based on observation of their complex behaviors and the close genetic kinship between all mammals and humans, and the fact that evolution proceeds incrementally, that bats have a rich inner life. See, I agree with that. And I think that that's a fair answer to the question. We might not be able to know what it's like to be a bat, but we can reasonably infer what it's probably like to be a bat based off of studying them. By the same logic, we can look steadily at less complex forms of behavior that allow us to reasonably infer some kind of mind associated with all types of matter, yes, including even the lowly electron. You see, and this is one of the issues I have with panpsychism, at least this version, is it's essentially saying every form of process has some form of awareness in it. And again, I just reject that. I don't think there's any... I would need to see a cogent argument in favor of that before I would accept it. So I just reject that premise. While inanimate matter doesn't evolve like animate matter, well, chemical, that I suppose, yeah, it doesn't evolve like animate matter, like life does. So yeah, I guess that makes sense, yeah. Inanimate matter does behave. It does things. It responds to forces. Well, yeah, like when we talk about behavior of an electron, we don't mean like its emotions and how it's reacting to those emotions. Yeah, there's external stimuli that act on electrons that cause them to behave in certain manners. But when we talk about behavior, what we're really talking about, to put it in more physics terms, is the action of the system. What the system does. If I put energy into a system, what is the system going to do? That's its behavior. But I don't think there's any consciousness or mind present in that. And again, I don't think there's really good arguments for that. Moving on, the electrons move in certain ways that differ under different experimental conditions. Okay, these types of behaviors have prompted respected physicists to suggest that electrons may have some type of extremely rudimentary mind. Sure, but it doesn't. Like, quarks also move in certain... Like, the fact that things move, the fact that systems, physical systems, will evolve differently, what I'm about to say is generally true. I need a preface with that. The fact that a physical system will evolve differently if you input different values for the initial conditions does not mean that there's a consciousness behind it. If I have an incline at a 30-degree angle and a ball at the top, the ball will roll down. But if I double that inclination to 60 degrees, the ball will roll down faster. We do not at all need to appeal to consciousness to explain that. We only need to appeal to gravitational forces. That's it. The fact that physical systems can behave if you input different values into the initial conditions means nothing for panpsychism. By the way, Friedman Dyson, this thing respected physicist, Friedman Dyson, while he is a respected physicist, I could be wrong, but I believe he's dead. So, yeah, Friedman Dyson had a lot of interesting ideas, by the way, and I don't agree with all of them. But yeah, I don't think he was like a quack or anything. I think he's a very, very respectable physicist, absolutely. Stated in his 1979 book, Disturbing the Universe, that the processes of human consciousness differ only in degree, but not in kind, from the processes of choice between quantum states, which we call chance when made by electrons. Wait, I'm so confused. Let me read that again. The processes of human consciousness differ only in degree, but not in kind. So it's saying that the degrees differ, but the kind of the degrees of the processes differ, but the kinds of processes don't. But I think that they do. Like, in quantum mechanics, there isn't like a firing of neurons. There isn't an exchange of ions between... oh, Jesus, I'm really drawing a blank. The name of the brain. Neurons. There isn't like... They're not being exchanged between neurons and things like neural pathways. Like, no, the processes are not at all the same, nor are the degrees. And see, this is the thing with a lot of physicists. People, and I've seen this with a lot of panpsychists especially, they'll cite a lot of physicists before they'll cite the neuroscientists. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just off my rocker. But that is something I've noticed from a lot of panpsychists. They're really quick to cite physicists and maybe mathematicians, but they're not so quick to cite neuroscientists. I would wonder why. Quantum chance is better framed as quantum choice, except that it's not. Choice, not chance, at every level of nature. It's just... I mean, this is really just trivializing what the word choice means, then. I mean, we understand how electrons how any quantum state behaves, and there's absolutely no relation to decisions made by an irrational agent. Like, I have to be honest, this really is bonkers, isn't it? At least to me, I don't even know what to say to this. Like, no, like, this is just not how quantum physics works. It works nothing like neuroscience, despite the fact that a lot of people have tried to claim that it does. No, the brain is far too wet, warm, moist, and large to be governed I shouldn't say wholly, but largely by obviously, everything at some level is governed by quantum mechanics. But when we talk about something being governed by quantum mechanics, we generally mean that quantum mechanical processes or states or systems are the preeminent aspects of that system governing its behavior. With classical systems, it's just not the case. And the brain is classical. David Bohm, another well-known American physicist who's also dead, argued similarly, quote, "The ability of form to be active is the most characteristic feature of mind, and we have something that is mind-like already with the electron," end quote. Now, see, I have to be honest, with these quotes, I could be wrong on this. I'm not saying they weren't. I'm just saying that I don't know that they were panpsychists, Dyson and Bohm. And maybe they were, and if they were, that's fine. It doesn't really mean anything to me. But if they're not, I mean, even if they are, this still kind of seems like quote mining. Like, this isn't an argument. This is just, well, this one physicist said this, so yeah. I mean, I don't think the author's arguing that because these people said it, therefore, like, panpsychism is true. Like, this isn't, like, you know, an argument from authority. At least I don't think. I suppose it could be, but I'm going to be charitable. I don't think that's what he's doing. But to me, it's almost not informative. Like, what is the context under which this was said? Like, this could have an entirely separate context from what it's being given in this paragraph. And I'm not going to spend the time to go try to hunt down this quote. People could do that if they want to. But this really at least comes off as quote mining. It's just, yeah, well, these two physicists said this, that, like, you know, it seems like matter has some level of consciousness in it. But what really is the context? Like, right here, you can see this quote, it doesn't start with a capital letter, so I would wonder what the rest of the sentence of this here is. What's the rest of this sentence, unless he just didn't capitalize the T there? But he did here, indicating that that is the start of a quote. But I would still be interested in the broader context of both of these. And again, maybe they are speaking in terms of panpsychism. Maybe that is what they're hinting at. But I can't say that it is until I've examine these within the context. So this paragraph really comes off as a quote mine. It's really not informative. Let me get a drink of water here quick. Many biologists and philosophers have recognized that there is no hard line between animate and inanimate. I agree with that. I don't think there's a hard line between the two. Maybe some people would disagree with me, but it seems that there's definitely a soft line. Like, we can look at a cup and know that it's an inanimate object. Like, the thing is that animate and inanimate should not be synonyms for life and non-life. Trees are, in a lot of ways, in certain respects at least, inanimate. I mean, a tree is not going to get up and walk and start moving around and things like that. But some people might not necessarily consider trees inanimate. But yeah, I don't think animate and inanimate can really be used as synonyms for life and non-life. Not that the author is necessarily doing that here, but I kind of get that hint of that. Also, again, there might not be a hard line between the two, but there's definitely a way to distinguish between an animate object and an inanimate object. I don't think most people would struggle with that, at least in most instances. Maybe there are instances, like a tree. Is a tree animate or is it inanimate? I mean, it can't really move. I mean, it can move upward as it grows. It can lose its leaves. It can move in the wind. Is it really an animate object, though, or is it an inanimate object? Like, there might be areas where it could go either way, but I think, largely speaking, we can pretty easily tell the difference between an animate object and an inanimate object. J.B.S. Haldane, the eminent British biologist, supported the view that there is no clear demarcation line between what is alive and what is not. Now that, see, the difference between animate and inanimate is, at least to me, not necessarily the same as between what is living and what is not. So that almost seems like an equivocation, not really an equivocation necessarily, but a jump from one thing, animate, inanimate, to another distinction, living, non-living. But this biologist supports the view that there's no clear demarcation line between what is living and what is non-living. But I think most biologists would say, yeah, we've got pretty good ways to determine that. And so again, it just, like here we've got a quote. It just seems like a quote mine. It just so far this article seems like, yeah, well, here's all these professionals that say this, so panpsychism must be reasonable. Like, it's just because you can find some professionals that have these vague quotes that, like, seemingly hint at this idea of panpsychism doesn't support panpsychism. Like, people who just pull quotes from professionals to support their position are not doing themselves any help. But anyway, the quote, "We do not find obvious evidence of life or mind in so-called inert matter." And the ellipse is, "I wonder what else is there. But if the scientific point of view is correct, we shall ultimately find them, at least in rudimentary form, all throughout the universe." This quote, you could see the ellipses there right before the semicolon. I wonder, and again, I'm not going to say that the author of this article is being dishonest. I'm going to be charitable. I'm not saying that I'm not saying he's being dishonest. I'm not saying that this isn't hinting at what he's saying that it's hinting at. I'm just saying I can't say that it is because I don't know. And I really don't feel like taking the time to go find these quotes and find the broader context. But again, this just comes off as a quote mine. This scientist said this that sort of agrees with my position, so there's that. But to me, that's just not really an argument. Niels Bohr, here we go again. Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who was seminal, I actually think it's either way. Seminal! We got jokes in the lion's den, don't we? In developing quantum theory, stated that, quote, very definitions of life and mechanics, again, there's an ellipses, ellipses, are ultimately a matter of convenience. More ellipses. The question of a limitation of physics in biology would lose any meaning if, instead of distinguishing between living organisms and inanimate bodies, we extended the idea of life to all natural phenomena. And again, this just seems like it seems like, yeah, I've got these physicists and these biologists that say, yeah, maybe we should consider all things living. Like, sure, they're saying that, but that doesn't mean that we should, just because you've got a few prominent physicists, all of which happen to be dead. Maybe this guy might not be dead, but like Freeman Dyson is dead. Niels Bohr is dead. David Bohm is dead. Like, you're citing these people from the 20s, 30s, 40s, like maybe into the 50s even, who have long been dead, who didn't have nearly the understanding of physics that we have now, who certainly didn't have the understanding of neuroscience that we have now. This isn't even an argument being presented in this article. It's just, hey, here's my idea. Here's a bunch of professionals, most of them are dead, that sort of kind of maybe agree with it. So take that. Ha ha ha. Panpsychism must be true. Like, again, now I'm seeing this more and more. I really am thinking that this is just an attempt at quote mining. I'm seeing quotes with ellipses in them and all this. Like, I just don't know the context of these. There has not been an argument. I haven't even really heard anything about how we could know or verify that the electron has consciousness. This just seems to be trying to support the idea that some physicists said that we should extend the idea of life or consciousness to all things in the universe and say that all things are living or all things are conscious. But that doesn't mean that that's actually the case. What's the argument here? I'm not seeing one. Oh, Lord, here we go with another one. More recently, this has been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This article has been nothing but 5 quotes and then a mentioning of another 3 people. Like, this is literally just quote mining the whole way through. Quote mines all the way down. Let's continue with it, though. More recently, University of Colorado astrobiologist Bruce Jakosky, who has worked with NASA in the search for extraterrestrial life, asked rhetorically, quote, "Was there a distinct moment when Earth went from having no life to having life? As if a switch were flipped?" The answer is probably not. Yeah, I talked about this a little earlier, so I'm not going to go over that again. But again, it's just, oh, well, here's this other professional, and here's what he said. This is, the 4th time now this has happened. Theoretical physicist Sabine Hossenfelder, author of the 2018 book Lost in Math, has taken a contrary position, as most physicists would. Sean Carroll also would. I'll bet you if somebody asked Leonard Susskind, who, after the passing of the late, great Stephen Hawking, I would argue is probably the leading theoretical physicist on the planet, certainly one of them, he would probably be like, yeah, no, there's no reason to think that like electrons and shit are conscious. If you want a particle to be conscious, your minimum expectation should be that the particle can change. She argued in a post titled "The Electrons Don't Think." Quote, "It's hard to have an inner life with only one thought. But if electrons could have thoughts, we'd long have seen this in particle collisions because it would change the number of particles produced in collisions." And so just to extrapolate a little more, what she was saying is that if electrons had consciousness and could have thoughts, if it's only one thought that they could ever have at any given moment, that doesn't seem to be much of a consciousness, which defeats the argument. But if they could have thoughts, then they should be able to change their thoughts and make decisions. And so if when we collide electrons together, maybe the electron says, look, I don't want to collide, so I'm going to go off this way. And that should change the kinds of particles we see produced in collisions. But we don't see this. We don't see anything indicating that that particles, or anything that's not like some highly advanced living vertebrate, has any reasonable level of consciousness. How would we measure it? We know, at least, we have reasonable ways of measuring consciousness in some creatures, especially humans. If we extend those ideas to electrons, then it seems plainly obvious that they're not conscious. But if you're not trying to use those methods, then what methods should we use? It's also worth mentioning this is the first paragraph where we've really seen something relating to the idea of specifically electrons having consciousness rather than the vague idea of everything in physical reality having consciousness. Yet change means many different things, including position in space over time. What Dyson is getting at in his remark about electrons and quantum theory is that the probabilistic distribution outcomes of quantum experiments are better explained as the product, not of pure chance, but of numerous highly rudimentary choices by each electron at each moment about where and how to manifest. The problem with that is, how do we measure that it is a choice and isn't just the evolution of a physical system given particular values for the initial conditions? How do we know this isn't just a blind, stochastic evolution of quantum states, or rather quantum systems, as we're pretty certain that they are? Like, again, like, what methodology do we use to determine rudimentary consciousness and rudimentary choice-making in elementary particles? Because if we're using the same way we do with humans and potentially other creatures, then it seems pretty reasonable to say, no, they don't have consciousness and don't make choices. But again, if it's another method, what's that method and how do we apply it? See, there doesn't really seem to be, thus far anyway, anything of substance in this article at all. Let's continue on. Whitehead's variety of panpsychism, still the most worked-out version of panpsychism today, re-envisions the nature of matter in a fundamental way. For Whitehead, all actual entities, including electrons, atoms, and molecules, are drops of experience, quote-unquote, in that they enjoy, at least a little bit of experience, a little bit of awareness. At first blush, it's a strange perspective, but eventually makes a great deal of sense. Not to me, though. See, it seems almost like with this, the author's trying to argue this idea that because things like electrons exist and they do things in reality, that they're experiencing, that there's some sort of awareness in their existence. But I don't think something existing in any way, shape, or form, let alone existing and engaging in some sort of action in any way, shape, or form, means that the thing has any level of awareness, understanding, or experience or perception of its surroundings or itself, for that matter. So this does not make a great deal of sense, at least to me. But again, that's just me. Rather than being unchanging things moving around in a container of space-time, the modern view in a nutshell, Whitehead conceives of particles like electrons as a chain of successive iterations of a single electron that bear a strong... Wait, hold on, is he saying what I think he's saying? Whitehead conceives of particles like electrons as a change of successive iterations of a single electron. Wait, so is he arguing that is this the one electron theory thing, I should say model, kind of being put out here? Let me just keep reading. That bear a strong likeness to each other in each iteration, but are not identical to each other. So I guess not. Well, maybe so, I don't know. Each iteration is a little different than the last. There is no static and unchanging electron. The degree to which each iteration is... This almost sounds like the space-time worm view, that objects in their persistence in space-time is different iterations between different arbitrarily defined moments in space, so that it's strung out like a worm with each segment corresponding to some arbitrary moment, and it's sort of extended through space-time like that, that all objects would be like that, and so it's kind of like, especially humans, and that we're sort of like a space-time worm that's extended through space-time at various iterations. So that seems to be like this. So like this here doesn't even really seem to be unscientific. The degree to which each iteration is more or less different than the last iteration is the place for an iota of choice and mind. I have no clue what that even means. What? What? Wait. Huh? The degree to which each iteration is more or less different than the last iteration. So wait, is it saying that because there's a difference between iterations that we can say that's a result of some at least rudimentary level of choice, and thereby there's some at least rudimentary mind? Is that what's being said here? Because if so, then again I ask, what's the argument for that? If you're just arguing, well, there's a difference, so that could be choice and thereby mind, that doesn't seem to follow. Change does not seem to imply choice. I think physics shows us that pretty well. Also, this rather than being unchanging things moving around in a container of space-time, the thing is, like, the Schrödinger equation pretty much tells us, yeah, that's pretty much what things do. So, I mean, anybody that's done infinite square wells in, like, an entry-level quantum mechanics, or, like, you know, a particle in a box, so to speak, knows that's pretty much what the Schrödinger equation tells us about how reality works. It's just a bunch of stuff stochastically evolving in, maybe in space-time. There's a bit of a debate as to whether there's such a thing as space, maybe time, but whether there's such a thing as space at that level. That's emergence of space-time. That's a completely different topic. Well, we will cover something like that on this channel, as I'm sure you all are well aware of. There is no static and unchanging. Okay, no, we read that. This iota of choice compounds upward and, through the course of biological evolution, results in the complex types of mind and choice that we humans and other mammals enjoy. Okay, I get what's being said here, I just don't agree with it, because I don't agree with the initial contention that it's based on. Yeah, we're almost done here. Many modern thinkers have come to embrace Whitehead and panpsychism to varying degrees. Many, but not most, including Bohm. Well, he's dead, he's not really a modern thinker, I'm sorry, whose Wholeness and the Implicate Order, his magnum opus on modern physics and the nature of reality, refers to Whitehead as an inspiration. That's great. And this is the thing. Just because physicists, like some of the most prominent, I've noticed, and I'm sure many people listening will have noticed this as well, that a lot of people with a lot of differing ideas like panpsychism and subjective idealism and other things like that will often appeal to generally like the dead quantum physicists, Richard Feynman, Niels Bohr, David Bohm, Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Erwin Schrödinger, Werner Heisenberg, all these men, and say, well, these men said these things, so it must, that gives credence to my idea. And it's just like, no. Number one, many of these men were physicists. Some of them really didn't have any understanding of philosophy, let alone neuroscience, because I'm going to be honest, at the turn of the 20th century, neuroscience was a field, but it wasn't even anything remotely close to something that's even approaching what the field is today. And it just seems like an argument from authority that you're citing physicists for something that is philosophical. It's philosophy of mind, not like philosophy of physics. And is also neuroscientific. These aren't really authorities on this. That's not to say that they can't have good ideas or super-based takes. It's just that they're not authorities. But hey, that doesn't mean that you can't listen to what they say or take it seriously. I've listened to some of the things Sean Carroll says about neuroscience, and I agree with a lot of what he says. But he's not an authority on it. However, credence is lended to what he's saying when he has discussions with those who are authorities, who then confirm the things that he's saying. But still, Sean Carroll isn't a neuroscientist, and I might agree with what he says, but I'm not going to say I'm going to take it with a grain of salt, but I'm going to take for what it's worth to me, the fact that he's not a neuroscientist. But yeah, it just, citing all these old quantum physicists to support your probably ancient philosophy that most people in the modern age don't agree with doesn't do you any good. These men did not understand a lot of these fields of philosophy and neuroscience, and a lot of them did not have the the knowledge of physics that we have today. So it just is weird that so many people turn to the quantum physicists of the days of yore to support their modern interpretations of thousands-year-old, generally philosophical ideas. I'm fleshing out in my work how we can turn these merely philosophical considerations about the nature of mind throughout nature into a testable set of experiments, with some early thoughts sketched here. I'm probably not going to go there. You know what? My curiosity is getting to me. Where's my consciousness-o-meter? Whether an entity is conscious may soon be a testable question. I think for the most part, it's already testable, to a degree at least. I mean, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. That's maybe I might read this article and see what's in it. That could very well be the next bad science communication, because this Nautilus Magazine isn't bad, but this is bad science communication right here. But we're not done, so we're not going to talk about that yet. Such experiments move debates about panpsychism out of the realm of philosophy and more firmly into the realm of science. So yes, there's plenty of room in modern physics for electrons to think, no, there's not, and you haven't established. I didn't hear a single argument or even really a point in favor of the idea that electrons have even an extraordinarily rudimentary form of consciousness. All I heard was, well, there's some physicists that say that, yeah, maybe this is possible, maybe we should consider this, but that's not an argument. There was not a single argument given. I don't think this was written by a physicist myself. Tam Hunt is a scholar and writer affiliated with the University of California, Santa Barbara. He is the author of the book Ego Eros, that explores panpsychism across various fields, and of the general resonance theory, what? Of consciousness, which is panpsychism orientation. That's why I haven't heard of it. It's going to link me to a Wikipedia article on it. Nope. Frontiers In, which is under some heat right now, that they're very selective about who they've been publishing for money. I'm not going to get into that right now. People can look that up if they want. The easy part of the hard problem. A resonance theory of consciousness. Tam Hunt. Okay. What does this person have? Like, doctorate research? So, yeah, what is their degree in? Bio. Focus on philosophy of mind, neuroscience, it doesn't tell me education. No, of course it doesn't tell me. He's got a PhD, but I want to know what it's. I would assume it's in neuroscience, but maybe it's just in, because I'm going to be honest, and I'm not saying that, I'm not disrespecting philosophers. I'm not saying that they don't understand these things, they don't research them, or I should say rather study them. But there is a difference between a physicist and a philosopher of physics. There is a difference between a neuroscientist and a philosopher of mind. And when it comes to understanding physics, I'm going to go to a physicist before I go to a philosopher of physics. That does not mean that a philosopher of physics doesn't understand physics, because most of them have like a bachelor's or a master's in physics, then got like a master's or a PhD, or a master's and then a PhD in philosophy, specializing in physics. Same with philosophers of mind. Many of them have a very strong understanding of neuroscience, but just me being honest, if I had a question about neuroscience, I'd go to a neuroscientist before I'd go to a philosopher of mind. But no, there is no room, I would argue, in modern physics for electrons to think, and people who actually understand modern physics, not the physics of 90 years ago, would probably agree with me. So, yeah, in conclusion, this is bad science communication. This is just not a good way to communicate either physics or neuroscience. And just me personally, I am kind of getting irritated with these half-baked, harebrained ideas and attempts at unifying physics, primarily quantum physics, with neuroscience. Obviously, everything is physics, but we don't need to get that reductive with our models. So, yeah, this stuff really, I don't even know what to say a lot of the time, because it's just, I have to be honest, it's just bonkers. Like, most neuroscientists are not going to agree with this, and I think you would be quite hard-pressed to find a modern physicist, like a alive today physicist, who would agree with this. They might say, yeah, maybe it's got a little bit of merit, maybe it's an idea we could take a look into, but I'm not going to give it much thought right now. It's just, the physics does not seem to support this. Now, maybe maybe neuroscience supports an idea like panpsychism, but physics, at least as far as physics, really doesn't support it. And you really have to, as we saw in this article, it seems you really have to make a stretch and really appeal to the ramblings of long dead men who didn't have nearly the understanding of a variety of different fields that we do now. So, thank you for tuning in to the second installment of Bad Science Communication, and I hope you guys are learning a little bit about how to point out or find and point out bad science communication. I encourage you guys to do that, and if any of you have any articles that you think are really, really bad in terms of communicating science or scientific ideas, my email can be found in the About section of my channel on YouTube. You can hit me up there. If you follow me on Twitter, you can hit me up there, or if you know me in other ways and have other ways of contacting me, you can hit me up through those ways as well, and I may potentially go over the articles if I find them interesting enough. And with that, as always, per causam nos perfectum, or through reason, I really want to emphasize that, through reason, we progress.